Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara, and today my guest is NDP MLA Rakhi Pancholi, joining me all the way from up north, well, relatively up north in Edmonton.
Nice to be here, Sarah. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, we always have great chats, so I'm happy that you're able to join me today.
I know we could talk politics for a very long time.
We could. So before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So Rakhi, I think you're episode number 32, which is in my mind like unbelievable. I never thought I would make it to episode 32. But I'm super excited to chat with you, and for people who don't know you to get to know you a little bit more, because I think you're my, I think you're my favorite NDP MLA in the province.
Oh, well, that's really nice to hear. Thanks, Sarah. I really.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, Janice is amazing, and obviously Rachel is. There are so many, you have a lot of really great colleagues, but I feel like we've connected in a way that, it's really nice.
I appreciate that, Sarah, because I really think there's a lot to talk about in terms of politics, but really what it's about is shared stories and shared connections. And if I may, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory, as well as Métis Nation 4, and my own personal commitment to reconciliation and to raise my children to open their hearts and minds and actions to reconciliation as well. So thank you for your acknowledgement. And I just wanted to make mine as well. So thank you.
Yeah, that's lovely. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, so you are the NDP MLA for Edmonton-Whitemud, and you are currently the Children's Services Critic. And in your pre-political life, you have a lot of different experiences, but you were, and I guess you still are, a lawyer who served in private practice and in the public sector, and then and you've been an MLA since
2019. So
2019.
I'm one of the few newly elected NDP MLAs in that 2019 election. Myself, Janice Irwin, and Jasveer Deol. So we were the rookie crew out of many colleagues who had not only been elected before, but actually had been ministers before. So yeah.
Yeah. No. And so I think, the first question I want to ask is, how did you go, what happened to you to make you political, and how did you go from being just political or politically engaged to running?
Yeah. And it's funny because since I've been involved in politics, I've been asked this question a lot about sort of my upbringing or my family's background as to sort of what got me interested and engaged in politics. And I don't have a clear answer for that. I think part of it's always been about sort of who I am in terms of feeling like advocacy is part of my soul and spirit. But, I do think it's impacted by the fact that my parents were immigrants to this country in the late 60s from Tanzania and India, respectively. And they always raised us with this idea that we're so not just lucky to be part of this beautiful country and to have the opportunities we have, but also it gave me a sense of, global citizenship, like this idea that you're always part of a bigger community, whether it be in your city, in your province, country, but even internationally. When you have parents who traveled the globe and chose a country to make their home, you get this feeling like you're part of something bigger. And so I think that's always been part of who I am, like in terms of volunteering and being engaging and finding issues that I'm passionate about. Even back, when I was in school, in high school and at junior high, I was acting on things. So politics was always something that I followed. I followed it carefully, just because I was interested. It's, these are things that affect our lives. And I was interested in the policy aspect of it. Policy is kind of a big driver for me. Like, how do you develop good policies that help people? And so I'd followed politics. I do have a little bit of past political involvement before I decided to run myself, which is that I worked as a constituency assistant in my local MLA's constituency office, who is MLA Laurie Blakeman, who is the Alberta Liberal MLA for Edmonton City Centre, Edmonton Centre as it was called at the time. And she was there for a long time. I just walked in there thinking, oh, this would be good on my resume to get some work. But she was a powerful, strong, passionate woman in politics. And that really, I think, inspired me quite a bit. I did work on her campaigns in 2008 and 2012. I didn't necessarily see a role for me running for politics. I remember Lori actually said to me, one day you'll run for politics. And I was like, I don't think that's, I'm a, at that point I was, had gone to law school, and I thought, oh, my advice would always be, or my role would be to be that background advice. Like, let me give legal advice. Let me give policy advice. I didn't see myself being front and center. But I had, watched as Rachel as was premier for those 4 years. I always say I was not politically engaged in that time. Actually, my daughter had just been born, my second child. She was born 10 days after the 2015 election. So I was like knee deep in newborn and toddler, then returning back to work full time in private practice. So I just watched. I really was watching, and it seemed like really amazing to me to see a progressive government. I remember election night hearing Rachel talk about Indigenous peoples and women and valuing public service. And those are things I'd never heard in Alberta politics. So I watched, I was impressed. I mean, there's always challenges in government, but really it was a progressive government, and that's where my values lay. And really what happened was why I went from being behind the scenes and watching to actually running was I was asked. And when you get involved in a lot of women political movements, you hear about how important it is to actually ask women. And I always say, I think I'm that kind of example of, I was not planning on doing it, but Sarah Hoffman actually was the one who asked me. I didn't know Sarah, but she and I shared a mutual friend. Our mutual friend and I had become friends because our kids were in daycare together. So I knew her as a daycare mom. That's really how we connected. But Sarah sat down with me and said, I'd like to ask you to run for the Alberta NDP in the next provincial election. And that was late 2018. And I don't know what it was, but in that moment, I thought about my kids, and I thought about the future of the province. I thought about the potential of losing a progressive government, which was really worrying to me. I saw sort of what was happening with Jason Kenney and the UCP. And I thought, you know what, it's time to take my advocacy to the next level and actually, walk the talk. And if I'm encouraging more women to run for politics, if somebody asks me, maybe it's my chance to put my name forward and take the risk.
I have so many questions. Well, and follow up. So the first question is going back to, so I'm really curious. So you talked about being like interested kind of in politics in high school. So like, what issues were important to Rakhi when Rakhi was in high school?
So, this is going to age me a little bit and date me, but when I was in high school, that's when there was the Meech Lake Accords and the Charlottetown Accords. And I remember that debate around our Constitution, that debate around equality rights, and as it was called then, Aboriginal rights. And that really, that idea of protecting minorities within majorities was very compelling to me. And the idea of recognizing how important that was in terms of contributions to our society and to our culture, and respecting our heritage in terms of our Indigenous heritage in this country. All of those pieces really resonated with me as somebody who is also a visible minority, newcomer to this country. I don't know, that really compelled me. So constitutional rights was always very interesting to me. And it carried over into my law degree. It carried over into, work I did. I did an exchange to South Africa when I was in law school. I went to Cape Town and studied there because I was motivated by the work they were doing in constitutional law, which was based on the work we had done in Canada. So yeah, those idea of bigger rights and minority protection rights was really always something compelling. In junior high, I was went down a strong path around environmentalism, and also around, I remember organizing a protest in junior high about the Iraq War. And, it wasn't very well attended protest, but I did try to organize that. So I don't know, this idea of being part of a bigger cause has always been like deeply held inside of me.
That's amazing. So in terms of the last, almost 4 years of a UCP government, the things that the notes that you're hitting on, I think are conversations that a lot of Albertans are having right now. And unfortunately, those aren't the major themes of the UCP leadership race. So, what do you, when you're out on the doors, what are people asking you about in contrast to what the narrative that we might be seeing on social media or, from other political parties?
Yeah, I think right now there's a few things, right? And I think this is universal across parties. I think I've heard UCP leadership candidates talk about this, and there's no doubt about it that I'm hearing this too on the doors, that families and individuals are concerned about cost of living and inflation. There's no doubt about that is probably one of the most universal comments. And that comes from families from very disparate and, income backgrounds. And sometimes it's worrying about what families who have less or how they're managing. But I think what I think that I'm hearing about that we don't hear about in that leadership race is really about this fundamental worry about the direction we're going in this province. And it's hard to not see what's happening in the United States and be concerned that narrative of catering to sort of fringe elements and not actually listening to what everyday sort of average people care about, which is that they want a strong healthcare system. They want a strong education system. Of course, they want to know they have good jobs that will pay well, but that they also want a good quality of life. And I think that's what I'm not hearing about, is that quality of life element, that a lot of the things that have taken place over the last few years have eroded some of the things that make Alberta great places to live. And that we're not talking about people. We don't hear a lot about what the impact of that, repeated antagonism towards the institutions and public service providers and all of the things that are really valuable to us as communities, how that antagonism over the last 3 years has eroded that trust in the government and made people feel less secure in their communities. And that's also true for people of color. It's true for Indigenous peoples. It has not been an issue that's been talked about that, there are very, racist views that have been expressed, as racist and hateful acts we've seen a rise in that. People don't feel as safe and secure in our province right now as they should. And while we talk about the economic boom that we're seeing in terms of, obviously a big increase in resource revenues, yes, that's happening, but people aren't feeling it. They aren't feeling like that's providing them any security. They're feeling like that's just going to be another opportunity for maybe some money to be handed out in terms of upcoming provincial election, but they're not thinking that's going to be invested in a way that's thoughtful for securing our education system and our healthcare system and post-secondary. They're worried it's going to be wasted again for political reasons, as they have good reason to believe that, because that's really been the history of Conservative governments in this province. So there's this optimism that the UCP has been talking a lot about, which I do think there are lots of indicators that things are improving economically for our province. But I don't know that Albertans are feeling that, and they're not feeling that security right now. And they want to know that there's a government that's actually supporting them and thinking about the things that matter to their family and are actually going to be advocating for a stronger vision going forward, not just Band-Aids handing out, doling some money. So those are the things that I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about in any political conversation.
I definitely think, obviously based on the Premier's Twitter feed, is they cherry pick headlines, which I mean, all political parties are guilty of. But, the emphasis put on, the occasional headline about, massive recovery, like those kinds of like 5-star, whatever, gives the impression that things are, I think, better than they really are. And the average family in Alberta isn't having that, isn't feeling the trickle down effects of, the occasional glowing headline from someone who may not actually really understand, the fear of, cost of living and, the constant talk about inflation rates and, are we headed towards a recession? Those are like really concerning and real fears for people, and it doesn't get captured in headlines. Those aren't the ones that are shared because it obviously tells a different story.
And if I may, I'd say that disconnect between the messaging and language of the UCP and the government versus what Albertans are feeling and experiencing has been consistent. I mean, right now it's around the economic, recovery. But it was very true during COVID as well, right? Like, we saw the language, we could obviously talk about the open for summer, right? Which felt very off with what people were feeling at the time, but also the very real, anxieties and concerns that people had around COVID, kids, sending kids back to school at that, before the second wave of the pandemic, was just being ignored, right? When parents were saying, we want some assurances that our schools are safe, that you've taken some measures, that I can feel confident. And that's very much, politics is a lot about feeling that emotion and connecting with people. And when the messaging is so off, you can't force people to feel some way by, continuing to message things over and over again. If they're not fundamentally experiencing that in their homes, you're going to be off. And I think that has been consistent with the UCP from the beginning. And it continues to be consistent from the UCP leadership race. What's happening and some of the things we're hearing about does not seem to be connecting emotionally with what the experience of most Albertans are.
Well, I think there was a poll that said, how important or of an issue is freedom, for example, or whatever it was to you. And it was like something like 1%, but that is like consistently, especially in the media and, for the most part from some UCP leadership candidates, that's what, their campaigns are based on. So if you want to, it's concerning to me that you're running your campaign on an issue that like 1% of people care about, but that 1% of what people care about could be, what elects one of them. And so I'm really kind of done with the idea that of, the government governing for party members, and not even all party members, but a specific segment of party members rather than for all Albertans. So, this seems like a softball question, but Rakhi, if the NDP forms government again next year, are you going to govern for all Albertans or only for, for a specific segment of your party?
Well, it may seem like a softball question, but it is. It goes back to kind of what inspired me to run for the NDP in the first place. Because when I watched Rachel as premier from 2015 to 2019, as I said, I was not involved with the party. I was not even politically active at that time at all. What I liked about Rachel was actually that she was pragmatic and governing in a position that, yes, she sometimes upset people on both spectrums. And there were some lessons learned very early on, but she seemed to be genuinely trying to do what was best for Alberta, not for her party. And to that end, there was lots of criticism from her within the Alberta NDP. I think that's natural, really. Not saying it's not relevant and we need to listen to that as well, but that was what drew me to run for the party, was that I really believed that Rachel was governing. I'm not interested, actually. My interest in politics is very little. My interest in governance is actually much stronger because that's where my policy perspective comes from. So, even from my role as critic for children's services, when I took on this role, childcare was something that I'm deeply passionate about. But I spent that first year and a bit just listening to all different perspectives, because there was perspectives around the $25 per day pilot program that Rachel brought in, that, I had to hear that there were some concerns around from some private operators as to how it was brought in. I listened, right? And that's how you govern. You have to govern from a place of what's best broadly. You're not going to make everybody happy all the time. But your role is as a premier is to do that. And I actually think that was Jason Kenney's downfall, which was, he had a few downfalls, but one of them was that he constantly was politicking, and he knows how to do politics really well. He doesn't know how to do governance well. I think Rachel knows how to do governance well. She knows how to do it very well. And when we talk about the work that we've been doing as a caucus for the last 2 years on an initiative called Alberta's Future, that's what that initiative was about. It was actually putting out policy proposals that were developed in consultation and engagement on a number of topics. I wrote the one on affordable childcare, but there's ones on tech and geothermal and AI and all this piece. We've been doing this for over 2 years now, and we've engaged over 70,000 Albertans, and we've asked for input. And that's because it's about even being told when we did something wrong. So I'm very confident that, that is the difference between winning elections and governing. And Albertans are tired of politicians who are only looking to win elections or win whatever race they're in right now, and are not actually interested in the harder work of governance. And I think that's what our focus has been on, Rachel's focus has been on, and that's the work I'm interested in doing.
Yeah, it's and that governance piece, the governing, is so critically important, because like the politics. So I'm like you. I love politics. I love, like, I really love politics, but I also really hate politics, the politics of politics, because I feel like that overshadows what should be, the governing aspect of it, because then it becomes about, this group wants this, or this is what a poll says, or it becomes less about the decisions and how people are impacted by them, and more about perception and communications, and also I think a hesitancy to do what may be difficult rather than what's easy. And to me, it's a great politician. There's a difference. A great politicians will do what is difficult, not what is easy.
Yeah. And if you think about the longer term policy implications of things that can have actually a significant impact on the economy and on people's lives, those things are not necessarily easy wins. They are things that actually take a lot of work. And you can't be doing something only because it'll have an immediate benefit for, say, the next election or whatever it's happening, because good, strong public policy actually has a lifespan longer than an electoral term, and should be thoughtfully developed with that in mind. And I mean, childcare is a perfect example of that, right? And even now, we have in Alberta signed this deal with the federal government. But to me, that's just the starting point. There's a lot of work to be done to actually transform our system into a publicly supported system that meets the needs of all families, wherever they are and whatever the needs of their family and child are. That takes a lot of work. It's not just the easy win of saying your childcare fees go down by $500. Yeah, that's an immediate benefit that really serves elections well. But it's actually not the longer term policy implications that we need to see to really transform things for families and women and children and our economy. That takes work. And, you've got to have a government that's interested in doing that work, and leaders who are interested in doing that work, not just trying to get the quick win for the next election.
Well, it's been interesting to watch because, the federal government, the federal Liberals signed, a succession of billion-dollar deals with every province and territory in Canada on childcare. And then they called that snap election, thinking, in my opinion, that, that was going to bolster, their chances of getting an even better majority. And that didn't work out for them. And then also to see now Rebecca Schultz, the former minister for childcare or for children's services, running, she, from a policy standpoint, none of the people that she's running against have signed, a multi-billion-dollar deal the way that she did with the federal government. And it's not even something, I mean, I'm sure candidates may talk about it, but it's not a centerpiece of the campaign. If it had been like a $6 billion bridge, I think everyone would be, it has a different currency in politics, but on the social side, it's disappointing to see that that the longevity, I think, of those deals hasn't necessarily been seen. It seems like it's been, pretty quickly forgotten in the minds of the public, which I find really fascinating politically. But so you talked about, the work that needs to be done going forward. So what are some specifics of what you would want to see if you were to form government again and you were to be the minister?
Minister of what, I guess. But I mean, there's so many things that I would like to see going forward, and we've laid out a lot of them. Obviously, like on the childcare front, you're absolutely right. Like it has dropped off the political radar. And I find that, deeply frustrating. I tell a story often about the childcare file, which is when I first was elected and I was named the Critic. A staff member, I won't name him, I don't want to get there's no reason to give him trouble for this, but he sat down with me as critic and he was like, just to give me perspective, he said, childcare, I'm going to give you this list of issues that Albertans care about. And just, to manage your expectations, childcare is like number 27 on this list of 30. It's pretty low down. But the top two are what Albertans care about, the economy and jobs. And I remember he said that to me thinking that he was just like, okay, just, I know you're passionate about it, but just, don't get too excited because Albertans don't really care about it that much. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, well, that's okay, because childcare actually is about jobs in the economy. So we just have to make people remember that. And we need to talk about it that way. And that's exactly what I did. I focused on talking about it. And it's because that is what it's about. And then the pandemic did open that opportunity for people to experience what it was like and how it affected their families and the economy when people didn't have childcare. But you're right. I think there's a sense now the deal is signed and it's done, right? And every province has signed it. And I think from the political level, the money's out the door, it's flowing. People are seeing some reduction in fees. So all done. And I've actually seen that perspective from quite a few people. And I know I keep reminding them there's a lot of work to do. And so when you talk about what would happen as an NDP government, priority is actually to do that hard work of consulting with the private sector, nonprofits, educators, experts in early childhood education to actually build a system quickly that produces results for families in terms of reducing fees, but also actually provides accessible childcare, because the need for childcare has not gone down. Yes, the parents who are already in the system have seen a reduction in their fees, but there are thousands of Alberta parents who still can't find spots. Waiting lists are through the roof. So, and we don't have enough educators. That is a huge problem in the workforce, right? So that's a top priority. And Rachel's already stated that we will be moving forward to implement that deal with a commitment, an increased commitment from the provincial government in terms of funding, because there's no way to get to $10 a day childcare without increased provincial investment. So those are that's the priority in terms of children's services. We have a lot of work to do to get some transparency and accountability on the child intervention system. And we've seen some devastating statistics and results over the last 3 years with very little transparency around what work has been done. And we have to be cognizant of Bill C-92, which is the federal legislation which grants authority to First Nations and Indigenous bodies to self-govern their child and family services. And we need to work as partners with First Nations and resource properly so that they can, and those who want to can successfully take over responsibility for child and family services and take care of their own children, as they always should have been able to do. So that's a key part from my perspective as the critic. Look, I think the most pressing issues coming forward are going to be cost of living. And we've got some, suggestions in terms of what we think should be done to manage that. But I think right now, stability in the education and healthcare system is absolutely critical. That is probably, after cost of living, the number one thing I hear about is healthcare. We've lost a lot of frontline healthcare workers, and we need to stabilize that workforce by, first of all, stopping fighting with them all the time and denigrating their work, which has been so critical during the pandemic, especially. Rebuild those relationships and trust. We need to look at efficiencies and addressing rural healthcare, particularly primary care. And then I'm a parent of young kids, and so I care deeply about the education system. We've fallen behind over the last 3 years in terms of education funding, but also it goes without saying that curriculum needs to be paused, and it needs to go back and actually have engagement with teachers in particular, so that we can develop a curriculum that's modern, but that also serves our kids well in the future and the life and the world they're living in with the skills they need to be employable. All of those pieces are deeply critical. We still haven't even touched on climate change and diversification of the economy. Like, there's a lot of work to do, right? There's a lot of work. But more than anything, it's building trust with government and Albertans again. And I think Albertans just want to see a government that's not fighting with everybody all the time, who knows how to work collaboratively and get results. And that's what I think Rachel did when she was premier. And that's what we'd be focusing on again going forward. That's a long answer.
No, it was a good answer. I think, I have definitely a desire for things to be a little bit more boring again.
100%. I think it would be nice to not have your outrage meter at 100% all the time, and and we become numb to it, really. And that's not a great place to be. There's so many things like that would used to have been like absolutely no brainers in politics. Like certain candidates would never been allowed to run having said certain things or done certain things, or certain issues. There would be outrage that we would say, oh my goodness, we have to reverse on that. It does not, when you're outraged all the time, it's hard to kind of be, keep track of which ones do we have to address first, but also can we just do the work rather than upsetting people all the time?
Well, I also think it's a strategy overall, because you just jump from, crisis to crisis, or, manufactured crisis. And then people become so overwhelmed that they just disengage, and then they stop, paying attention, or pay less attention. And then ultimately, that makes it easier for, things to happen that would otherwise be a real scandal.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I feel like we could do 2 episodes, but
and I'm happy to.
Yeah, we can definitely do. Well, of course we can do more. So tell me, I feel like there's a very concerted effort on the part of the Alberta NDP that I'd say star MLAs like you and Janice Irwin are spending more time in Calgary. So how important is Calgary in the next election politically?
Calgary is very important politically in the next election. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think that's a secret. I think anybody can see that if you just look at the numbers in terms of how many seats are required to be a majority in this government. There's no doubt about it that, Calgary is critically important to any party wanting to form government. And not just in terms of the math, right? But Calgary is also I'm an Edmontonian through and through, and have been, raised here most of my life and spent most of my life here. But Calgary is a key part of our economic future in terms of it drives the perception of Alberta. It drives a lot of the innovation, obviously being the heart of the oil and gas sector. It's critically important. But there's also simply just a lot of people who live in Alberta or live in Calgary, right? And they need to be well represented. So there's no doubt about it that I've made a concerted effort, as well as so many of my colleagues, as well as Rachel. Rachel's there in Calgary almost. She is.
It seems like she's here all the time, right, to be honest.
And not because we don't care deeply about, Edmonton and other parts of the province. But there's a lot of energy shifting happening in Calgary, and it's sort of a key part to understand where our future is going to go. So we're spending a lot of time. I'm spending a lot of time. And what I've loved actually is developing relationships with Calgarians and door knocking. I've been door knocking quite a bit in Calgary and breaking down some of those perceptions that Calgarians might have about the Alberta NDP, but also that Albertans might have about Calgarians, right? Like I've seen such incredible, and it's very true. Calgary is one of the most diverse cities in Canada. Like it's an incredibly diverse city, and that story isn't told very often, and it's not talked about very much. And there's lots of different, I guess, almost levels to Calgary. And actually, Stampede really brought that out. There is obviously there's corporate Calgary, and there's the movers and shakers. There's the big events that happen around the exhibition grounds, but there's so much happening in the community as well. And I've went to so many pancake breakfasts in all parts of the city, and every crowd is a little bit different. Every group of people is different. And so tapping into all of that energy and that shift and diversity within Calgary has been quite a joy, actually, for me as a politician. I've really enjoyed spending a lot of time there and getting to know a lot of people there and hearing how they want to break down a lot of perceptions about Calgary. And I've seen a shift even in 3 years, like in terms of embracing innovation, renewable energy, embracing, just like new tech opportunities. Like it feels like there's a shift happening. And I will confess, I'm not, a Calgarian through and through, but I can feel that. And so I want that story to be told. And I want Calgarians to know that the Alberta NDP are listening and care.
So, okay. This question, so this is audio only. So there's like no video. Okay. So, but like I have it written, I'm showing it to you. I'm holding it up. So this question I had written down before. So this isn't based on your answer. It's just it sets it up perfectly. And it's not something that I'm like, this was planned. So my question, what story does the Alberta NDP want to share with the rest of Canada about who we are, in contrast with the messaging that has been put out over the last 3+ years by the UCP?
Yeah. And I think that's almost, that's the story I want to tell, is about that diversity of Calgary, that people are drawn to Calgary from all parts of the world, all parts of the country, that there is an excitement about renewable energy, that there is an excitement about clean tech, that there is a vibrant art scene, that there is vibrant small businesses, that we want Calgary to be a vibrant source of our post-secondaries, right? Really drawing talent to Calgary, that Calgarians care about, their outdoor spaces. They care about good quality of life. It is an exciting place to be, that Calgarians do want to work collaboratively and want to, be the source of fantastic innovation and excitement for Alberta. It's really what I see when I'm there. And I appreciate that I'm not in every space in Calgary. I know that. But I just hear that there is a lot of optimism for just really rethinking what is an energy leader, right? An energy leader has changed. And I don't think Calgary's resisting that. I actually think that they're embracing it. And so that's the story I'd like to tell. I'd like to tell that story of Calgary, and talk about the experiences of newcomers to Calgary. Talk about the challenges and the opportunities and the skills they bring. That's what I'd like to talk more about.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a message that, obviously, based on my question, I am interested in as well, because I'm from BC originally. My 10-year anniversary is quickly approaching in September. But, I had ideas about Alberta. I actually never wanted to live here, or had ever planned on moving to Alberta. It was only because I met my now husband that I ended up here. And, as soon as I arrived in Fort McMurray, actually, was the first place I lived here. I quickly realized that, there are narratives about Alberta that are just simply wrong. And that, I still defend and educate, I would say, people about not only Fort McMurray, but also about, misconceptions about Alberta. Also through Madam Premier, I meet a lot of people, from other places in Canada and then outside the world who, have questions about, what it's like to live here and about the politics. And so there are so many opportunities to tell so many different stories about Alberta and about individual places, whether it's Fort McMurray or Edmonton or Calgary or Lethbridge or Medicine Hat. And I think there are so many amazing people in those communities who can tell those stories. And I'm optimistic that moving forward, we get away from, the division and the narratives of the energy center and, picking fights with everyone and everything. And we can start telling a positive story rather than simply attacking and being negative.
And if I may, Sarah, I think that's one of the reasons why diverse representation is also really important in Alberta politics, because I can tell you a story of, I remember I was participating in a conference with the UCP MLA, and we were asked to share a little bit about our stories. And she and I are exactly the same age. We've grown up in Alberta. And what I realized was her story was very different about what drove her into politics. She talked a lot about the impact of the national energy policy and the impact on her family and her dad's job. And that's a very real experience. I don't want to dismiss that. But what I thought was interesting is that I grew up in Alberta at the exact same time. And I had a very different experience. And one is not better or different. It's just they're different. But the one narrative has really dominated. And one of the reasons I got into politics is because, I've had an experience growing up here that I think actually is reflective of what many Albertans have experienced, being a visible minority, being a child of immigrants, moving to a city, and I think that voice needs to be heard as well. And that's why diversity and representation is important. I mean, it's not just, surface level, icing on the cake. Like, it's actually legitimately about bringing different perspectives. And so I think we need to have more of that so that we can actually have those perspectives shared in our approach to things. Because often when I hear this antagonism from the UCP government towards everybody and anything, but more than anything, I just hear it and I think that just doesn't reflect how I feel. I don't feel angry all the time at public servants and even the federal government. I just don't feel that. I feel like, let's get some results happening. And so that's why diversity is important in representation.
Definitely. And I think it's pretty obviously, that the emphasis that the Alberta NDP is putting on candidate diversity in your recruitment, because like I see it based on the candidates that you're putting forward. And you're really right. I mean, my husband is an immigrant. The conversations that we have are very different. For example, last night we were talking about, the potential impact and fallout. So he's from Iran, around, the meeting yesterday with Vladimir Putin and the Prime Minister of Turkey, Erdogan, and the alignment. And then last week, the meeting with, Biden and Mohammed bin Salman and Israel, and, how that affects our family and his family. And the consequences of that. So it's different. Not all Albertans are having the same experience. That's a really important point to make. And you need to have a variety of perspectives and lived experiences and backgrounds of people in the legislature to be able to when decisions are being made, that they're made through different lenses, not solely through the lens of, one dominant perspective. And so we're on the same page there.
Yeah. I'm really proud of actually the work we've done to attract and support some very diverse candidates. Like, when I look at in Calgary and even some of the new candidates that we've had announce across the province, like, this wasn't just a superficial exercise when we talked about diversity. Like, we worked hard to, obviously you can't control who's going to put their name forward. But I actively, personally spent quite a bit of time trying to, every time I met somebody who was, really engaging or interesting, to have those conversations. I mean, that's how I ended up in politics, because Sarah Hoffman asked me, but, and they're not going to come, those diverse candidates are not going to come and put their name forward and go through all of the challenges of running for office unless they truly believe that the party has the values and will support them and reflect their perspectives. So we have work to do, and that's the work we've done to demonstrate that we are committed to that. And I am excited. I'm very excited about the candidates that we've had come forward. In terms of backgrounds, we have, I think, currently 4 Indigenous candidates who come forward. We don't have a single Indigenous MLA right now in the legislature, right? But women of color in particular, and that is to have those that diversity of perspectives. And I'm sure you've heard this, Sarah, because, you've been in this space for a long time. The pushback whenever we say things like we have a commitment to diversity, we recently announced that our commitment that, an NDP-led cabinet would be 50% gender diverse, right? And, you get the pushback of people saying, "Oh, I'd rather have qualified
Exactly.
candidates."
That's the number one thing I hear is
Always.
like, "Oh, I only, they're not qualified." Yes, they are actually.
Well, my 2 responses are always like, "Oh, so isn't it funny that for generations then the only qualified individuals were white males?" I mean, that's not about qualification. That's just about confirmation bias, right? And that we certainly just recognize certain things over other things. That's not because women were not qualified, persons of color, Indigenous people. It's just that, you can't talk about it being about qualifications when it's only been one subset of people.
And they are the architects of the system.
That's
which purposely excluded everyone else.
That's
so
right.
You're telling me that there has never been a single, below, less than, star male political candidate. Everyone has been top tier A+ grade.
Yeah. That's right.
Come on.
Exactly. I also think we have to challenge what qualified looks like, right? Because and that goes to your comment about it's really that it's that same group of people who have been deciding what the institutions would look like. It also is the same group of people who have been deciding what the qualifications look like. When we don't actually value things like lived experience, international or global experiences, or community advocacy as qualifications, like all of those pieces, that's when you start to exclude people. And of course, the other piece of that too is then it also puts an enormous pressure on, women and diverse candidates to then be, well, if you don't do perfectly, then you're bringing down this, you're proof that, women aren't as qualified, right? You bear that weight of that.
Meanwhile, are they in a winnable riding? What supports are you giving them? Are you giving, if they're having a hard time fundraising, how is a provincial party, supporting that? How many visits are they getting from outside or currently elected MLAs to help on that front? Like, it goes on and on and on.
Yes.
How many are you sending in outside volunteers? What are you doing? Like, I have a lot of questions.
Yes,
around,
exactly.
You can't just do it. There are more pieces to the puzzle.
Absolutely. And that's one of the commitments we've made as a party too, is that support. And like, I personally, it's one of the reasons I'm outdoor knocking every time I'm in Calgary. I go out and support candidates, right? To do that work, because we need to support, if we're going to encourage diversity, we need to support those candidates as well.
Yeah. I think it's about recognizing that there are recognizing and acknowledging that there are additional systemic barriers within the system that exists, and that without acknowledging them, you're doing everyone that gets asked a disservice.
That's right.
Because it's not setting them up for success.
100%. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time, and I love chatting with you. So I'd love to have you back again. Maybe in a few months or in the new year, when the political landscape will definitely be different after the election or the whoever the UCP picks as their candidate, obviously. So thank you so much for giving me your time today. And I'm excited to see what happens. And, I love talking with people who are excited about politics and obviously governing, and about making Alberta a better place for everyone.
Thank you, Sarah, for your commitment. You've been such a constant voice for women and diverse people, and in terms of involvement in politics. And I love the work of Madame Premier. Again, this is only audio, so nobody can see, but I am wearing my Madame Premier
You are.
Women's Rights or Human Rights t-shirt that I just picked up last week. And so I just want to thank you as well for being a really strong voice in Alberta politics for women. Appreciate it very much.
I appreciate that. So I'm sure you have a busy day of all kinds of political things going on. Yes, I'm sure you do. So thank you. So this has been another episode of Elected. Until next time.